Hello, friend. Welcome once again to my class on Research and Statistics Guide. Today, I want to give you an idea on how to carefully select the appropriate sampling technique that is required in your population study. It is important to understand that before you can key into this class, you must ideally understand what sampling techniques are and the available sampling techniques we have. The probability sampling techniques, the non-probability sampling technique, you must be familiar with them. But many a times the most daunting challenge is which one is appropriate for my study. And that is the uh, benefits of this particular session. So stick with me as I carefully explain to you the principle that should guide you in selecting or settling for the appropriate sampling technique. Again, my name is Dr. Felix Ayodele. Now, it's important to understand that if your selection method is wrong, definitely your conclusion will equally be wrong. So, the means, the end does not justify the means. It is the means that justify the end in this context. Okay? So, again, which sampling technique is appropriate for your work? We have said that this is a crucial step in every research process because it will affect the validity of your findings. The validity of your study will be affected by the choice of sampling technique you adopt or you employ, and the reliability of that particular work at the end of the day. And of course, to what extent can you apply the finding of that results even to the entire population? So that's the generalizability of your results. So these three things are very, very important, and this is why we must carefully select the appropriate sampling technique. So, but what are the principles that should guide us? Number one is your research objectives. The research objectives is very, very key in every research process. What do you intend to achieve? What do you set out to achieve in the course of that particular research? Okay, number two is the population characteristics. What's the nature of the population you are dealing with? Are we talking about homogeneous population? Is it a heterogeneous population? Is it a diverse population? What is the size of that particular population you are dealing with? And number three is the availability of resources. Okay, what time do you have? What will cost you? And what available manpower do you have to support you in that research process? And number four is the required accuracy and precision you hope to get. Usually, at the beginning of a research, the researcher is expected to set the precision he hopes to get at the end of the day. Very, very important. And that will dictate the type of sampling technique you have to use. And why the fifth one is the sampling frame availability. More often, when you conduct a probability sampling, you apply a probability sampling technique. For most common probability sampling technique, like the simple random technique, the systematic random technique, and even the stratified random technique, you will need the sampling frame. The sampling frame is a list of every element, every individual, every member of that particular population that you have to also assign number to, from which you intend to pick your needed sample. So in a situation whereby you don't have a sampling frame, how do you go about that? So in that case, you may have to consider using some other sampling technique. So why number six is the risk of bias. How much bias do you consider tolerable in that particular research? And number seven is the study design and the data analysis plan. So let's take them one after the other quickly. Number one, again, is the research objective. So if you are doing a descriptive study, most likely uh, you are going to be settling for probability sampling. Or let's put it this way, probability sampling will be most appropriate for your work if you are doing a descriptive study. So maybe the simple random sampling or the stratified random sampling. It makes your work generalizable, okay, at the end of the day. But if you are doing exploratory study, maybe qualitative study, then the non-probability sampling may come in handy, like the purposive, the snowball sampling, depending on what you actually want to find out. But it's important to quickly say here that probability sampling is the only approved technique, okay, to actually test hypothesis. When you are testing hypothesis in the course of your study or your research, probability sampling is the appropriate, is a gold standard for actually testing hypothesis. While non-probability sampling can be used to formulate hypothesis, but we don't use it to test hypothesis. Okay, number two is the population characteristic. Again, I said if your population is large and diverse, stratified or cluster sampling may help to ensure the subgroup are properly represented. If you are dealing with the entire, maybe a nation where you have young children, you have adolescents, you have teenagers, you have adults, and you want to pick a sample, maybe to investigate their perception about the political parties across that particular nation. So it's important to give consideration to the different demography in that particular population. So in that case, we are going to be using something like stratified, okay? Because you have different strata based on age group, based on sex, based on strata, and what have you, okay? But of course, if you have diverse group, maybe you are dealing with a community, you have pockets of villages, hamlets all around, you may want to be considering cluster sampling approach. And of course, if the population is homogeneous, the simple random sampling and the systematic random sampling will suffice. But again, it's important to understand that simple random sampling is most appropriate when you are dealing with a small population, okay? While systematic random sampling, a homogeneous population, but is a very large population, that is when you may have to use the systematic sampling technique. Okay, number three consideration is the availability of results. How much time do you have? And to what extent can you show that the cost that your sampling technique may actually demand? So limited resources may inform you using convenient or quota sampling, which is the non-probability sampling technique. But if you have sufficient resources, of course, you may have to go for probability methods, okay, which are more robust and may also require more planning, and of course it will require some level of effort. While number four is the require accuracy and precision, which I've mentioned earlier on. The higher accuracy will demand random sampling technique, and of course it will also reduce bias. But less clinical decision may allow more flexible non-probability method. So if your goal is just to formulate policy, hypothesis. Maybe you want to have an idea, you want to run a pilot test before the main test itself, the non-probability sampling may come in handy in this case. While number five is sampling frame availability. If you don't have sampling frame, most likely you are going to settle for non-probability sampling. If a complete list of the population is available, simple and systematic are quite handy. But if sampling frame does not exist, then cluster and snowball sampling will be quite handy. Okay. Number six is the risk of bias. Now, to minimize selection bias, you may have to prioritize probability sampling technique. For target insights, bias may be acceptable when you are dealing with a non-probability approach. While the seventh one, which is the last point, the last principle, is the study design and the data analysis plan. Many a times people start research work before they start thinking of the data analysis plan. This must come as early as the onset of that particular research. You must decide how do you need to analyze the data you're going to get from that particular study. So statistical method will assume random sampling. If you are going to use statistical method to analyze, then you must stick to random sampling technique. But if you are not going to be using statistical method, okay, so that may bring in some level of, allow you some measure of flexibility, and then you start using probability sampling technique. So that is the nuggets as regards the guides for you to select your sampling technique. I believe you have gained one or two things from this session. I'll see you again in my next class. Thank you.